Once you create an account with SaniPath and have gathered information about the SaniPath deployment you will be conducting, you will be ready to configure your deployment. You will be gathering all of this information from your key informant interviews and transect walks. For more information about these, refer to the preliminary assessment protocols on our SaniPath wiki page. On the left side of the configure screen, you have a menu of the different sections for this step, including the introduction, the types and pathways, the populations, lab type, and neighborhoods. You can access each of these sections by clicking on these menu items, or you can scroll down to access them that way. For the introduction, it explains information you will want to have before configuring your deployment. For example, you will want to know who you will be interviewing and how you will collect different surveys, what pathways you are interested in analyzing, where you will be collecting data, and how you will be measuring it in the laboratory. We'll start with behavioral surveys and pathway selection. In this table, you will be selecting what pathways are relevant for your deployment and what types of surveys and data you will want to collect. On the left-hand side of this table shows all of the different possible pathways that you might want to collect. For example, open drain water, raw produce, drinking water, etc. On the top part of the table shows you the different types of data you can collect. The first three are the survey types, for example, household surveys, community surveys, and school surveys. And the final column is the sample data. This refers to the environmental samples that you can collect. It is important to know which of these pathways exist in the neighborhoods where you will be working. You will want to select all of the pathways that are present in at least one neighborhood, even if they are not present in all neighborhoods. You will select the pathways that you will want to include in each survey. Let's assume for this deployment that we have all of the pathways present except floodwater, for example. Let's also say that we want to conduct household surveys, community surveys, and school surveys. In that case, we can go through the table and select each circle for the type of data we want to collect. For open drain water, we can check household data, community data, school data, and sample data, meaning that we will collect that type of environmental pathway. Same can go for raw produce. We can also choose to select the circle to the left of the pathway to select all types of data for that pathway. We'll go down the line and select all of the different types of data for each pathway. If our neighborhoods lie near oceans, then we will select oceans as a pathway. Surface water. I mentioned that we do not have floodwater in our neighborhoods. Therefore, I will not select floodwater. This means that floodwater as a pathway will not show up in any of the surveys or sample data collection forms. Public latrines, private latrines, soil, bathing water, and street food. If there are any pathways that you do not want included in any of your data collection tools, you can simply uncheck those boxes. For example, if we know we will not be collecting ocean water, we can uncheck the ocean water sample data box. Before moving on, you'll also notice that several circles on this table are X'd out and not available to select, as in soil and private latrines. For private latrines, you cannot select sample data. This is because environmental samples collected in the SaniPath tool are only collected from public areas. Therefore, we do not provide sample collection and laboratory protocols and forms for private latrine samples. and the analysis will not provide a risk profile for fecal exposure from private latrines. We do, however, ask questions related to private latrine use in the surveys. So you may choose to keep these questions available in the surveys. As you can see, you are able to check these circles for private latrines. For soil, you will notice that the 3 survey types are X'd out, here, here, and here. This means that questions will not be asked about exposure to soil on any of the surveys. As you can imagine, it would be difficult to ask respondents how often they come into contact with soil. You do, however, have the option of collecting and testing soil samples for E. coli, so that you can get a general sense of the contamination in the soil within a particular neighborhood. Therefore, you have the ability to check this final circle for soil under sample data. Next, we'll move on to populations. This table allows you to select whether you would like each survey to include behavioral questions about adults or school-age children, or both. The behavioral surveys will ask about the frequency of exposure to each environmental pathway. If I only select adults on this table, the surveys will only ask questions about adult behavior, and therefore the tool will only generate risk profiles for adult exposure to fecal contamination, and the same goes for children. Here are the 3 different types of surveys: household surveys, community surveys, and school surveys. And here you have adults and children. In this example, I would like to include both adults and children in all types of my surveys. I can do that by selecting adults and children this way. Again, if I decide not to ask questions about children in community surveys, for example, I can simply uncheck this circle under community data. Next, we'll move on to lab type. In this section, you will select the lab methodology you will be using to test environmental samples during your deployment. The 2 options you can select from are membrane filtration and the IDEX method. You may only select one type of methodology to be used throughout the deployment. This choice will depend on the capabilities of your laboratory. You will want to check with your lab before making this selection. This selection is important because the lab test forms generated by the tool are different for each method. In addition, the analysis used to produce your results are different depending on the type of method you choose. Once you select a lab method in this configuration stage, remember that you will not be able to change it once you move to training and deployment. In this example, we will choose the IDEX method. And finally, we come to neighborhoods. In this section is where you will enter the name of the neighborhoods you will be collecting data in. This is the only section that you may add to after you begin your deployment. Please note that you can add neighborhoods during a deployment, but you cannot delete a neighborhood once you begin data collection. If you do decide not to collect data in a neighborhood you have already registered, you can simply not select that neighborhood while filling out the data collection forms. To register a new neighborhood, click on Register a New Neighborhood. Here you will enter the name of a neighborhood. We'll call this Neighborhood Westview. And you may choose to enter any notes associated with that neighborhood. For example, I will put that this is a high-income neighborhood. Finally, you will be asked if the neighborhood is near an ocean. You will click on this if the neighborhood borders the ocean, as this will be a potential exposure pathway. If you select this, then questions related to exposure to ocean water will appear in the behavioral surveys for that particular neighborhood. Questions related to exposure to ocean water will not be included for neighborhoods where you do not check this box. So we will go ahead and say that Westview is near an ocean. Once we are done, we will click Save and Continue. Now you will see that our first neighborhood appears in the neighborhood table. We'll go ahead and register one more neighborhood. Register a new neighborhood. Again, we will enter the name of the neighborhood. This one we will call East Lake. Again, we can put any notes that might be relevant to that neighborhood. For this one, I'm going to say it is near a railway. You can put any notes that you would like, maybe just to give some context to the neighborhood. This one is not near an ocean, so we will leave this blank. Click Save and Continue to save that neighborhood. You can add as many neighborhoods as you would like to include in your deployment. To edit a neighborhood, you will click on the pencil icon located next to that neighborhood, and you will be able to change any of the information associated with that neighborhood. So for example, if I made a mistake and this is in fact a low-income neighborhood, I can change it here. I will then click Save and Continue. Please note that you can only make one edit to a neighborhood. If you do need to edit a neighborhood again, you can simply delete that neighborhood and re-enter it. In order to delete a neighborhood, you would click on the trash bin next to that neighborhood. You can click Confirm to delete that neighborhood or Cancel to not delete it. When you have entered all of the information on this page, you can click Save and Initiate Training. You will be reminded that you can continue to edit your configuration of the project during the training phase, but not once you begin the deployment. Click on Continue to Training. This will take you to the training phase of the SaniPath tool. This completes the tutorial for configuring your SaniPath deployment.